Food is essential to your well-being and to your very existence. Whether you're a struggling college student surviving on instant noodles or a 7-foot 1-inch, 325-pound NBA superstar capable of physically moving an entire defensive line simply by existing near it. But while most professional athletes are carefully monitored, weighed, measured, and fed according to meticulously designed nutritional plans, Shaquille O'Neal spent the better part of 2 decades doing the exact opposite, and somehow, impossibly, became one of the greatest basketball players who ever lived while doing it, the fast food king. There are people who enjoy fast food. There are people who love fast food. And then there is Shaquille O'Neal, a man who has an almost spiritual, borderline devotional relationship with fast food that goes so far beyond simple enjoyment that it begins to look less like a dietary preference and more like a life philosophy. Shaq's love of McDonald's is not a rumor, not an exaggeration, and not something that faded politely into the background once he became rich and famous enough to eat at the finest restaurants in the world. It is a well-documented, frequently confirmed, proudly unashamed obsession that followed him from his childhood in Newark, New Jersey, all the way through his years as the most physically dominant player in the NBA, and straight into his post-retirement life as a businessman and television personality. To understand just how deep this runs, you have to picture the scene of Shaquille O'Neal, a man who could not comfortably fit in a standard car, let alone a drive-through lane, pulling up to a McDonald's and attempting to order enough food to feed what could generously be described as a small gathering. This was not an occasional treat. This was not a cheat day. This was, by multiple accounts from people who knew him and worked with him, simply Tuesday. During his time with the Los Angeles Lakers in the late 1990s and early 2000s, the years when he was winning 3 consecutive NBA championships and being named Finals MVP, each time Shaq was notorious among team staff for his fast food habits. While his teammates were carefully following the nutritional guidance of the Lakers' training and conditioning staff, Shaq was, on more than one occasion, reportedly pulling through a drive-thru on the way to or from practice. Not after a game, not as a celebratory meal, just as a regular, unremarkable part of his day. His love of Krispy Kreme donuts deserves its own mention entirely, and will in fact get one later in this script. But it's worth flagging here that when Shaq talks about Krispy Kreme, he does not talk about it the way most people talk about a donut. He talks about it with the kind of reverence and warmth that most people reserve for a home-cooked meal from their grandmother. There is a tenderness there that is genuinely remarkable, coming from a man built like a small building. But it wasn't just McDonald's and Krispy Kreme. Burger King, Popeyes, and various other fast food chains all featured heavily in Shaq's regular rotation. And what made this particularly extraordinary was not simply that he ate fast food, plenty of people eat fast food, but the quantities involved and the complete absence of guilt or shame attached to any of it. While other athletes of his era were giving carefully worded interviews about their strict dietary regimens and the discipline required to perform at the highest level, Shaq was out here eating a double Whopper and daring anyone to say something about it. His former coaches, trainers, and teammates have spoken over the years about the impossibility of getting Shaq to comply with team nutrition guidelines with anything resembling consistency. Phil Jackson, who coached the Lakers' dynasty teams, was famously meticulous about the physical conditioning and preparation of his players. And yet, even Jackson, a man who had successfully managed the enormous egos and complicated personalities of players like Michael Jordan and Dennis Rodman, struggled to get Shaquille O'Neal to put down the chicken nuggets. What made it all so maddening, of course, was that it worked. The man ate like a 16-year-old with unrestricted access to a food court and still went out and was genuinely, historically, statistically unguardable, which leads us neatly to the next chapter, the diet that shouldn't have worked. By any reasonable nutritional standard, Shaquille O'Neal should not have been as good as he was. The diet he maintained for a significant portion of his career, heavy on fast food, light on vegetables, enthusiastic about sugar, is the kind of eating plan that would cause a sports nutritionist to sit down and have a very quiet moment of private despair. And yet, here we are. To be fair to Shaq, he was not entirely without awareness of his own dietary shortcomings. He has spoken in interviews about knowing that he probably should have eaten better, trained harder in the off-season, and taken his conditioning more seriously. In fact, in one particularly candid moment, he acknowledged that if he had applied the same discipline to his diet and physical conditioning that he applied to his on-court presence, there is no telling what he might have achieved. Which is a terrifying thing to contemplate, given that what he actually achieved without doing those things was 4 NBA championships, 3 Finals MVP awards, 1 League MVP award, and a 15-time All-Star selection. The battles between Shaq and various coaches and training staff over his weight and diet are the stuff of NBA legend. During his time with the Lakers, there were ongoing and frequently tense negotiations between Shaq and the front office about his conditioning, with his weight fluctuating significantly between seasons. He would sometimes arrive to training camp visibly heavier than when he had left, having spent the off-season eating, by his own cheerful admission, more or less whatever he wanted. His personal trainer, at various points in his career, reportedly faced the unique challenge of designing workout programs that could compensate for the fact that their clients' dietary habits were working actively against them. Imagine being handed that particular brief. You have one of the most physically gifted athletes in the history of professional sport, and your job is to get him into peak physical condition, while he is simultaneously and enthusiastically undermining your efforts from the other direction with a bag of Burger King. What is perhaps most fascinating about all of this is the psychological dimension. Shaq was never a man who ate badly because he was unaware of the consequences or because he lacked access to better options. He was an enormously wealthy, highly intelligent man, surrounded by professional nutritionists, team chefs, and conditioning experts whose entire job was to make sure he ate well. He simply chose not to. And there is something almost admirable about the sheer scale of that refusal, the quiet but absolute insistence that no amount of professional advice was going to come between him and his relationship with food. It also says something interesting about the man's confidence. Most athletes at the elite level are, to some degree, superstitious and anxious about their performance, obsessively monitoring what they eat, how they sleep, how they train, terrified that any deviation from the routine might tip the scales. Shaq operated with such profound self-belief that he seemingly never worried that the McDonald's was going to catch up with him on the court. And for an extraordinarily long time, it didn't. The man has a sweet tooth the size of his shoe. If Shaq's relationship with fast food is a well-documented public record, then his relationship with sugar is something more personal, a deep, enduring, and frankly staggering love affair with anything sweet, sticky, or covered in icing that has been a consistent feature of his life from childhood right through to the present day. Let's start with cereal, because the cereal situation alone is remarkable. Shaq has spoken openly about his love of sugary cereals, not the kind of cereal that is even pretending to be healthy, but the brightly colored, heavily sweetened, cartoon masco-tangent-fronted cereals that are targeted primarily at children under the age of 10, and he doesn't eat them in the modest portions indicated on the side of the box. He eats them in the kind of quantities that you would expect from a man who requires more calories in a single day than most people consume in 3. Picture, if you will, Shaquille O'Neal, 7 feet 1 inch tall, a man who wears a size 22 shoe sitting down to a bowl of frosted flakes. Now picture the size of bowl that would be required to make that a satisfying experience. Now picture him going back for a second bowl. This is not a hypothetical. This is just breakfast. His love of candy and sweets more broadly is equally well established. Teammates and associates over the years have noted that Shaq's presence in any shared space tended to result in a noticeable depletion of whatever sweet snacks happened to be available. Team locker rooms, hotel suites, hospitality spreads at events if there was candy within reach, the candy was not long for this world. But it was the Krispy Kreme situation that really crystallized just how serious Shaq's sweet tooth was. His love of Krispy Kreme donuts is so profound and so well known that it eventually transcended mere dietary preference and became, as we will discuss in detail shortly, an actual business venture. But before we get to the business side of things, let's dwell for a moment on the eating side of things, because there are stories. Associates of Shaq have described him consuming donuts in quantities that would be alarming in anyone, but seem almost cosmically appropriate in a man of his size. Not 1 or 2 donuts as a treat. Not half a dozen as a slightly indulgent morning. Full boxes, multiple boxes, consumed with the kind of calm, satisfied efficiency that suggests this is not a guilty pleasure, but simply a meal. Inevitably, as Shaq moved into his late 30s and beyond his playing career, the cumulative effect of decades of sugar and fast food began to demand some attention. He has spoken publicly about being diagnosed with sleep apnea, a condition strongly linked to weight and diet, and about the broader conversation he had with doctors about getting his health in order post-retirement. To his considerable credit, Shaq did make significant efforts to address his health in later years, losing weight and becoming more mindful about what he was putting into his body. But even in interviews about his health journey, there is always that unmistakable note of nostalgia when the conversation turns to Krispy Kreme. Feeding a giant the sheer scale of it all. There is a mathematical reality to feeding Shaquille O'Neal that is worth sitting with for a moment. At his heaviest playing weight of around 325 pounds, carrying it on a 7-foot 1-inch frame in the middle of an NBA season that involves 82 regular season games, intensive training sessions, and the kind of physical exertion that would hospitalize most ordinary human beings, Shaq's daily caloric requirements were extraordinary by any standard. Sports scientists working with athletes of Shaq's size and activity level during his era have estimated that he would have required somewhere in the region of 6,000 to 8,000 calories per day simply to maintain his weight during the season before you even begin accounting for weight gain or loss. That is the caloric equivalent of roughly 12 to 16 standard McDonald's Big Mac meals every single day, which, knowing what we know about Shaq's dietary preferences, was perhaps not entirely far from the truth. The logistical reality of catering to Shaq on road trips during his Lakers years is the kind of thing that team staffers apparently still talk about. Hotels that hosted the Lakers during road games were routinely faced with the challenge of stocking enough food to adequately cater to their most demanding guest. And by all accounts, Shaq was, in the most literal sense, the most demanding guest. Not in terms of temperament, by most accounts. He was jovial, friendly, and easy to deal with as a person, but purely in terms of the volume of food that needed to be available at any given moment. Teammates have recalled road trips where Shaq's meals were less a single sitting and more an ongoing, rolling event that continued across multiple hours. A dinner that might represent a complete and sufficient meal for 3 or 4 average-sized men was, for Shaq, simply a starting point. The man required fuel on a scale that the standard hospitality infrastructure of even well-resourced NBA hotels was not always fully prepared to provide. There is a famous story confirmed in various forms by multiple people who were present during the Lakers dynasty years about a team meal during a road trip where the catering staff had prepared what they considered to be a generous and ample spread for the entire squad. By the time Shaq had moved through the buffet line, the mathematics of what remained for his teammates had changed quite dramatically. This is the kind of story that is funny in retrospect, and presumably slightly less funny if you were the 7th man on the roster hoping for seconds. His former Laker teammate Kobe Bryant, who was himself famously disciplined and meticulous about his diet and conditioning, reportedly had an interesting vantage point on Shaq's eating habits. Given that the two men were for several years the twin engines of one of the most successful teams in the league, the contrast between the two could not have been more stark. Kobe, obsessive about every calorie in every training session. Shaq, equally obsessive, but about an entirely different set of priorities. And yet, for 3 consecutive years, between 1999 and 2002, they won everything together. Which says something quite profound, though it's not entirely clear what, from the plate to the business. Here is where Shaquille O'Neal's story becomes genuinely remarkable, the point at which his eating habits stopped being purely personal quirks and started being the foundation of a serious and highly successful business strategy. Because Shaq, for all his apparent nonchalance about the finer points of nutritional science, is a genuinely shrewd and exceptionally intelligent businessman. And at some point he appears to have looked at the things he loved most in the world, fast food, donuts, franchise dining, the simple and uncomplicated pleasure of a meal that requires no ceremony, and decided that if he was going to spend this much of his life and money in these establishments, he might as well own some of them. His involvement with Krispy Kreme is perhaps the most perfectly fitting business decision in the history of professional sport. Shaq became a franchisee and investor in Krispy Kreme, meaning that the man who had spent decades consuming their product in quantities that must have been meaningful to their quarterly earnings was now also benefiting financially from everyone else doing the same thing. It is a beautifully circular arrangement. Beyond Krispy Kreme, Shaq has invested in and operated franchises across multiple fast food brands. His Auntie Anne's pretzel franchise interests, his investments in various food and beverage businesses, and his broader portfolio of consumer-facing brands all reflect the same underlying philosophy that there is real and durable value in the things that ordinary people love to eat, and that a man who genuinely and authentically loves those things himself is well placed to understand and serve that market. What makes Shaq's food business empire particularly interesting from a psychological standpoint is that it is not, as is sometimes the case with celebrity business ventures, simply a matter of lending his name and face to a product he has little genuine connection to. Shaq's relationship with these food brands is real and well established, long before he became an investor. He didn't decide to invest in Krispy Kreme because someone told him it was a good opportunity. He invested in Krispy Kreme because he had been one of their most enthusiastic and devoted customers for the better part of 30 years. There is something refreshing and even admirable about a man of his wealth and stature refusing to be embarrassed by his tastes. He could very easily have cultivated a more refined public image around food, hired a personal chef, started talking about his love of organic cuisine, been photographed at expensive restaurants, and instead Shaq has remained, loudly and cheerfully, the man who loves Krispy Kreme and wants you to know about it. That kind of authentic consistency is rarer than it might appear, particularly at his level of celebrity. His food business interests are now worth, by various estimates, tens of millions of dollars, which means that Shaquille O'Neal has taken the thing he was most criticized for during his playing career, the dietary habits that drove coaches and trainers to despair, and turned them into a significant and growing part of his post-basketball financial legacy, which is either deeply funny or deeply impressive, and quite possibly both. There is a version of this story that could be told as a cautionary tale. The elite athlete who refused to take care of himself, who frustrated coaches and squandered potential, who ate his way through one of the most gifted physical careers in the history of professional sport. And there are elements of truth to that version. Shaq himself has acknowledged it. But there is another way to read the eating habits of Shaquille O'Neal, and it might be the more honest one. Here was a man who, from the very beginning, knew exactly who he was and refused to perform a version of himself that didn't fit. While the world of professional sport demanded discipline, sacrifice, restriction, and the constant subordination of personal desire to the requirements of peak performance, Shaq ate his McDonald's, had his Krispy Kreme, poured his cereal into a bowl the size of a satellite dish, and went out and won 4 NBA championships anyway. His eating habits were never really about food. They were about identity, the cheerful, unapologetic insistence of a man who was larger than life in every possible sense on living entirely on his own terms. And in the end, those terms turned out to be pretty good ones. He ate what he wanted, played how he wanted, built a business empire around what he wanted, and remains one of the most beloved and recognizable figures in the history of the sport. Not bad for a man who just really, really loves a donut.